I wrote in a book for children about the development of egg of Mantella or Hulteke, so I think it suits here. And it gives you maybe an idea before I start with a presentation about the Mantella keeping, of the development of the Mantellas. So these are all pictures I made in my terrariums. Yeah. Don't wonder if it's a little bit written in a not so scientific way. Yeah? Okay. Once upon a time, there was a little white egg that was lying in a protecting, sticky mass under some moss. It wasn't just a single egg. Next to it, there were many other eggs which were as small as it. The little white egg was round like a ball, and the sticky protecting mass that surrounded the egg was transparent. So you could see that the little egg was as round and white as all the other little eggs that laid with it under the moss. One day, the egg changed and got a little bump. That wasn't bad, because all the other little white eggs that were connected with it through the transparent sticky mass got little bumps too. Sometime later, the little bump changed to a long appendage, almost so as the little white egg and all the other little white eggs should get a tail. Did one take a closer look the next day, one noticed that the little white egg wasn't an egg anymore. It still was connected through the sticky transparent mass with all the other eggs, but weren't eggs. Those weren't eggs anymore too. At once, the little white egg looked like a little fish. It became a tadpole. Suddenly, it got a big white belly, a long tail, and two little eyes, just like all the other little white eggs. Did one look at the transparent sticky mass from some distance, one could recognize how small the tadpoles were. And did one lay a 1-cent coin next to it, one could imagine how tiny the little white egg must have been. The tadpoles started to move and bend to free themselves out of the sticky mass. When it started to rain, it happened. The sticky mass was washed with the tadpoles in a small puddle, where the tadpoles could free themselves. At the beginning, they were exhausted by the effort and laid motionless in the water to gain strength again. Pretty fast, they recovered and started to move. They finally had hunger that needed to be satisfied. They had real eyes that helped them to find the food. The little tadpole ate and grew very fast. It hid under leaves that laid in the puddle. The tadpole protected itself from enemies that liked to eat it. The eyes grew bigger, and the small tadpole got a wonderful golden brown coloration, almost like the leaves underneath it was hiding. The little tadpole recognized that bit by bit things changed on its body. At once, left and right next to her tail, little stubs grew that almost looked like little legs. But why? It had the big tail that helped it so wonderful to move through the water. And indeed, next to the tadpole's tail, there grew strong legs with really long toes. It recognized very soon that swimming became easier. But when front limbs were grown, the little tadpole was confused. How should it swim now? The legs might have been helpful, but the front limbs? they definitely won't be helpful with swimming. Something was wrong. At once, it didn't have appetite for algae and plant remains. It didn't have appetite at all. The tail that helped so wonderfully to swim became smaller and smaller. But the worst thing was that it got the impression to get no air. The tadpole had to get to the water surface more and more often to catch a breath. It decided to leave the water and go onto land. The little tadpole wasn't a little tadpole anymore. It became a little frog that still had a little bit of its tail that was so useful for swimming. But it knew that it couldn't breathe underwater anymore and that it would feel much better on land. It will feel as well as it felt under the water when it was a tadpole. The little frog looked for a place where it could hide. There it waited for little insects that it loved to eat. Since it changed from a tadpole to a frog, it didn't like algae and plant remains anymore. Even it liked it so much when it was a tadpole. The little frog was happy that it wasn't alone. All the other little white eggs that were connected with it through the transparent sticky mass and swam later with it as a tadpole in the puddle went onto land too and metamorphized to frogs. The little frog became more and more hungry. The more hungry it became, the more often it left its hiding place. Because not enough insects passed by it could eat. It had to move around to search for them. One day it passed by a little puddle, where it saw its reflection on the water. It was grown a lot, but what was more astonishing, the dark brown coloration of its skin seems to change to a bright orange. The skin of the little frog indeed changed to a wonderful bright orange color. The little white egg finally became a beautiful bright golden Mantella. The little golden Mantella felt very comfortable and wondered again and again which incredible changes it went through until a little white egg, which was surrounded by a transparent sticky mass, became such a beautiful frog. One day, our golden Mantella disappeared with another golden Mantella underneath some moss. When our golden Mantella appeared from underneath the moss, one couldn't believe what came to light. Suddenly, there was a little white egg in a transparent sticky mass that was connected with many other little white eggs through the transparent sticky mass. And so, the story of the little white egg can start again.
Sweet.
I hope you liked it. I decided to start with it because it gives you an idea of the different states of the development of the Mantellas. I didn't, make the presentation so, how do you say, exactly with all the stages. So if you have any questions in between. Yeah. That's okay? It's okay? Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
So if you have any questions, just let me know. Yeah. Now I'm gonna start with the presentation. If I come out of here again. Yeah.
You just press down there.
136 slides. Wow.
There, yeah. So, the genus Mantella are also called the colourful frogs of Madagascar. This is a Mantella levigata. I heard some of you guys already kept them. To my person, I was born in Mannheim in 1973, which is a town a little bit south of Frankfurt in Germany. I'm keeping frogs since 1984. I was 11 years old when my parents allowed me to get my first terrarium. I started with the common American tree frog, so nothing spectacular, but yeah, it was a beginning. And in 1992, I found in the pet shop where I bought my insects for the American tree frogs, the first Mantella orangiaca. And I decided that I want to keep those nice frogs. And I bought four of them. In 1994, I bought 4 more. And after that, we got the, how do you say, Washingtoner, we call it Washingtoner Artenschutzabkommen. So the regulation of import and export of species. So I think since then it wasn't allowed to import Mantellas to Europe or to Germany anymore. I was lucky that in 2005 I still had 2 of those Mantella orangiaca from 1992 and 1994. I got a group that was taken at the customs in Frankfurt at the airport. 6 more frogs, and I was able to breed with them. I got some other species, I bred them too, and in 2016 a book about Mantellas I wrote was published in Germany. So it's about 200 pages and almost 200 pictures just about the breeding and keeping of Mantellas. And this is the base of the lecture I'm going to give you now. I'm going to start to give a small introduction into the genus. And this is a painting an artist from Madagascar made for me. I asked him to paint all the 16 species of Mantellas. It is a batik. I don't know the translation if it's right. So it's like wax, and you have all the different colors in different stages, always waxing the cotton again. So it's a specialty in Madagascar, and this is what is now hanging in my living room. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna give you a small introduction of all the species with pictures. After that, we're going to talk about the terrarium setup, the climate. I already was asked by several people about the climate, about the light, the water, the ground, so how I keep my Mantellas. And at the end, I'm going to give a more detailed introduction into the keeping of 4 species. We differ the Mantellas in different groups. So I'm going to start with the Mantella madagascariensis group. To the Mantella madagascariensis group, the most known Mantella, the Mantella orangiaca, is called or is belonging to that group. We have Mantella grossea. We have Mantella madagascariensis. which is, I think, the second most known Mantella. We have the Mantella milotympanum. We have the Mantella pulchra. And the second group, we have the Mantella baroni group. So this is not a Mantella madagascariensis, the picture. It is a Mantella baroni. It was very interesting to listen to Peter. I'm gonna come to his lecture later on too. We have the Mantella baroni. Later on I'm gonna show you the differences of Mantella madagascariensis and Mantella baroni, because there are some details. We have Mantella covani, which is like the dream of every Mantella keeper. It's, yeah, the rarest Mantella species you have. So it's really said that it's endangered to be extinct in the wild, but nobody is allowed to keep them. We have Mantella haraldmeyeri, which belongs to the Mantella baroni group too, and the Mantella nigricans, which is kept here in Sweden, I heard, and terrariums too. Then we have the Mantella levigata group with the Mantella levigata, sorry, I just have this picture. And Mantella levigata is an interesting frog because it's one of the only, or it's the only Mantella which is living more in the climbing state, not really in trees, but in bamboo forests. And we have the Mantella maneri, which almost looks like Mantella levigata, but is living on the ground. Then we have the Mantella bernhardi group, which is just existing out of Mantella bernhardi. And we have the Mantella betsilea group, and this is where I thought on Peter, because maybe you think he took the same picture like Peter did, but I didn't. So we have these brown frogs with a black side and a frenal stripe, a white one, in Madagascar too. And the interesting thing is, they don't have it once. They have Mantella betsileo, and they have Mantella ebenaui, and they have a lot of other frogs from other genus which really look the same. Yeah, so somehow it's interesting that this coloration appears again and again all over the world. Then we have Mantella expectata, for me one of the most interesting Mantellas, because it really has a very specialized form of living and breeding, but that's one of the species I'm gonna talk more detailed later. And we have the Mantella viridis, which I bred a lot during the last years, but nobody is interested in, so I have no idea what to do with all the froglets. Yeah. Okay. I told you I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about the difference between Mantella madagascariensis and Mantella baroni. These two species are genetically really very far from each other. Miguel Wences and Frank Laaf, two German biologists, made a lot of researches, and they found out that in that habitats where Mantella baroni and Mantella madagascariensis are living together, The Mantella baroni is genetically wiping Mantella madagascariensis out. So the Mantella madagascariensis is not really being able to stay together with Mantella baroni. It's funny because in all the terrariums in Europe, there are just almost existing Mantella madagascariensis. So, yeah, nobody knows why, but it seems to be more common frogs in the terrariums, but in nature it's really different. The Mantella baroni is much more common, and the Mantella madagascariensis has to battle a little bit more. What's interesting with the differences, you see this stripe on, let's call it a crown on the head. With the Mantella madagascariensis, it's going into the coloration on the side, and with Mantella baroni, it has an interruption. The coloration can differ. So here it's a little bit more yellow at the Mantella madagascariensis, and at the baroni a little bit more greenish. So it doesn't have to say a lot. That the coloration is like going more into the white at the edges. It's just at that individual. But what's interesting, you have just a few spots, black spots at the legs, back legs of Mantella madagascariensis, and at Mantella baroni you really have like deeper black spots. And when you turn the frog, you much better see the differences. So Mantella madagascariensis has red legs, Mantella baroni has black legs, so just the lower legs of the feet are red, and Mantella madagascariensis has like flakes on the belly, and Mantella baroni bluish spots, so they are more round. And you have like almost closed cycle at the throat, and at Mantella baroni throat it's almost just black. Now I'm going to talk about the terrarium setups. When we went for lunch, we already discussed in a small group about the keeping of Mantella expectata. This is a terrarium especially for Mantella expectata, so it's not really a rainforest terrarium like somebody would expect for Mantellas. The expectata is a very special frog because it's living in the Rocky Mountains of the Isalo, which is a mountain range in Madagascar, and it really lives in the rocky part and not in the valleys where you have a lot of like small forests. And so I'm going to show you some pictures later on. And I try to simulate that in a terrarium. First I kept them in rainforest terrariums, but somehow they didn't produce any clutches or hardly. And I just tried to make a more dry and rocky terrarium, so they produced a lot of clutches and felt much better. At the other, or with the other Mantellas, I really tried to build some rainforest terrariums. So I have what we in Germany call Dendrobatenbecken. So these are the terrariums with a glass up the ground, which is a little bit like a slide, so the water goes in a small ditch in the front. I try to keep the Mantellas not very cold. So I always be asked, how do you do it to cool the terrariums down? Because everybody says, or it's written everywhere, that Mantellas need to be kept cool. So they don't really need to be kept cool. So most of the species are living in the highlands of Madagascar, where you can have cool, cool periods during the year. But in those periods, you really don't see the frogs. So I think it's very hard to have a cool period in the terrarium, because you have to find a range where the terrarium has temperatures where the frogs are really gone for weeks, a month, because at that time where it has to be cool, they if it's really cool, they won't eat. They won't eat in nature too, I guess. Yeah. Similar like the European frogs we have. You won't find a grass frog or a tree frog in Europe in winter. Yeah, it disappears somewhere, but it's so cold that they don't eat at all, that they have like a rest. Yeah. I had the problem with one person from Switzerland. I gave this person several Mantella aurantiaca, a group of 10 individuals, and after 3 months I was told that all the frogs died and that I didn't breed good frogs. Yeah. So we tried to figure out what was the problem, and we found out that the temperature was wrong. This person told me that she installed something from a refrigerator and made an installation that this thing from the refrigerator cooled down the terrarium, and it was somewhere in the middle of the terrarium, in the middle area, a temperature in the summer of 18 degrees. So it must have been about 12-14 degrees on the ground where the Mantella aurantiaca were sitting, and they were still active, but not as active as they were able to get some food. So somehow they starved after a while, and yeah. I kept my Mantellas in an apartment where I used to live. It was directly under the roof, and we really had big, huge windows to the south where the sun was shining the whole day into this apartment, and we had temperatures up to 40 degrees centigrade. And I never had problems with my Mantellas because I always used relatively huge terrariums with minimum 80 centimeters of height and about 70 centimeters of height. So the Mantellas could look for regions that they liked or needed for the temperature. So you see with plants, there are a lot of plants, a lot of hiding places where the animals can disappear. It's not always easy to find them or to see them, but if you keep up the humidity, if you want to stimulate the males to call, you really see them regularly. And I think it's very important to have big terrarium settings. The smallest terrariums I had were 80 centimeters. Now I'm rebuilding my groups. I gave or passed away almost all my animals 3 years ago. I built up a new terrarium setting with terrariums with minimum 1.50 meter length. And this terrarium, I took the pictures. It's in my practice. It's 2 meter 30 long and 70 centimeters, no, 1 meter high and 70 centimeters deep. So the Mantellas really have space to disappear. And if you take the temperatures, so I told before, never ask me about keeping temperatures of Mantellas. I had a thermometer right here. I think you can see it. Huh? And when you looked at it in the summer, you had temperatures up to 50 degrees centigrade in that area. I have a lot of light bars on the top. If you measured the temperature in about this area, you had something about 27, 28 degrees at the same time. And if you measured the temperature somewhere near the ground, you had temperatures about 22 degrees. So I have no idea which is the right temperature to keep the Mantella in that moment. So if you have a big setting, I think it's good. You have a lot of microclimates and the animals have the opportunity to decide where they want to be and where they're gonna feel well. With the light, I told you, I used to have a lot of light bars on top. Here you can see that it's very, very grown with plants. So the Mantellas really have the possibility to hide somewhere. I think this was a tag for Mantella madagascariensis. You see one here. And in the front you have a small water part. You always have to watch out. Mantellas are very, very easily drowning. So if there's just one part which is too steep, they always need the possibilities to climb out of the water. So I lost a lot of rocks, which is always making me angry because when they just drowned in the water part because I rained too much. With the light is for me very important to give the animals the impression of the changing of the seasons. Very often the light, or I change the light in the terrarium when I just take out a lot of plants. So more light is going to the ground where the Mantellas are, and you really don't have to change a lot on the terrarium itself. With the water, I already told you, you have to watch out. So the water shouldn't be too deep, and it really has to be easy for the frogs to get out. I used to go to a spring to get the water for the frogs. I always sprinkle my terrariums by myself, so I don't have any rain installation where at a special time a special amount of water is being sprinkled in the terrarium. I always do it myself. Two things. One thing is you decide how much it can rain, which might be interesting if you see that one female, for example, is having clutches in her belly. So you can try to stimulate the males to call more easily, and you see the frogs after it rained. So you have a better control about the frogs. If you have like just a raining or automatically raining machine, It rains when you're, I don't know, having lunch, being at work, sitting on the toilet. So you won't see the frogs after. And I always try to combine. I let it rain. After that, I feed the frogs. And then most of the frogs come out. And you can see how they behave. Are they too fat? Are they too slim? Are they moving regularly? Is there something wrong with one or more frogs? So for me, it's better to do it myself. We have very hot water in Mannheim, the place where I live, so I don't use any tube water. That's why I went to the spring to get the water over there. I don't do the driving to the spring anymore. It was about 50 kilometers one way, which was okay when you had 250 frogs and a big car and could take, I don't know, 250 liters of water. Now I just take distilled water. And for raising the tadpoles, I take water out of the pond in our garden, because I think that that water is filled with micro
Yummy,
things.
yummy.
Yeah, like algae or small bacteria and small things, which might be good for the tadpoles too. The only tadpole, it will be a part later on, which doesn't have any problems with distilled water, are the tadpoles of Mantella levigata. But I think it's because this species is really very special in the breeding with the tadpoles. But that's something I'm gonna tell you later too. To the ground, in the terrariums, most of the Mantellas are living on the ground or on the ground in their habitats. The best ground I figured out for the Mantellas was peat. It was very often described that clutches are not fertile, that clutches of Mantella died. I used to use normal ground, which was like being flower ground out of, let's say, the Bauhaus. I never had fertile clutches. It was back in the 1990s when I started with the keeping of Mantellas. And somehow I changed to peat. I don't know why, but that was that I had fertile clutches. I guess it's very interesting just to figure out which kind of ground is good for the frogs. I don't know if you go to different habitats all over the world, like Peter does. No ground is the same in all the habitats. So if you keep different kind of frogs, it might be interesting just to try out which is the best ground for the frogs. I took this picture because I think we shouldn't tidy up our terrariums too much. I always take out plants. I always try to, if there are too many plants growing in the terrarium, to take out stuff so there's getting more light to the ground. But some of the stuff I just throw on the ground in the terrarium because that's where the animals live, that's where they find their food, and that's where they find the different microclimates they probably need. It's always interesting to hear that you go to a forest and you hear a frog calling underneath a leaf, but you don't find it, so the frogs need those spaces. That's where they live. So I think it's good to make experiences with the different grounds too. To the food. A good friend of mine once said that breeding any kind of frog is always a question of the food you give to the frogs. I found very interesting articles about the praise the Mantellas have in their natural habitats. Woodhead et al. Made a report on it in 2007. A very good friend of mine, Rainer Dolch, helped to make this study. Rainer Dolch is leading a project, it's called Mitsinzu, it's in Undersea Bay in Madagascar. And in that area where Mitsinzu works, there are the Toruturu swarms where the Mantella aurantiaca is living. And they took French bicycle reptiles. They had a small rubber tube and gave water into the stomach of the Mantella aurantiacas and made them puke. So they tried to find out what kind of praise they had in their stomachs. They took 64 Mantella aurantiacas. They found in those 64 Mantella aurantiacas 5,429 animals which the 64 Mantella aurantiaca had eaten. And what was interesting for me is that 95.8% was smaller than 3 millimeter, 82.8% was smaller than 2 millimeter, and 36.5% was smaller than 1 millimeter. They had 34% mites, 24% flies, 13% springtails, and 11% ants.
Numbers or volume?
Good question. Numbers, because now we have the volume. And if you have the volume of the animals the Mantellas had eaten, you had 28% ants, and they found 9 different species of ants. I don't know any frog keeper which is feeding ants. Oh, there's one. I know one.
Yeah.
It's very interesting for me because I never, had the courage to feed ants because I never knew will the Mantellas have any problems eating them? Will you have problems having them in the terrarium? Will you have much bigger problems having them in your apartment? But I think if we really think about keeping frogs, we should have an idea of what the frogs are eating, and that we have a full range of praise they eat. And a lot of keepers in Germany, they think, I have Drosophila, it's a very nice food, and that's it. So we don't want to have schnitzel every day or hamburger every day. We need full range of food. So it's very interesting that there's somebody who feeds ants. 24% of the volume were flies and just 5% were mites. And if you see on this side, 34% were mites, so they ate most of the mites, if you took the percentage, but the volume is pretty small. Menzies and Kniel made another study back in 1998, and they examined Mantella nigricans, Mantella levigata, and Mantella betzileo, and they found out that they ate about 74% ants. We don't have any idea why they found those insects in their stomachs. Maybe it's just what the animals find in the leaf litter where they live. So nobody made a study what is living in the leaf litter. So they just examined the frogs, but they didn't examine the leaf litter or the ground, what the range of insects is there. So you can't really tell if they need ants or if they love ants or whatever, or if it's just there and they take it. So this would be very interesting for the future, maybe. In the terrarium, we don't have so many possibilities. I used to have 3 different kinds of fruit flies. I've had 4 different kinds of fruit flies. And what I made, I always, or still make, I always feed my food before I feed it to my frogs. So the Drosophila get multivitamin syrup for children before I feed them into, or give them into the terrarium. The crickets, they always get pretty good and expensive fish food. And the firebrats I feed too. I used to give a lot of minerals back in the 90s to the food or onto the food before I fed it to my frogs. And I recognized that the Mantella aurantiaca very often got like small white dots on the back, which gave like skin problems to the frogs, which were seeable later on too. My father was working as a pediatrician and had a small laboratory in his practice, and he made like, how do you say, Abstrich, so you just take a little bit of the skin and look on the microscope, and he said that has been like mineral crystals, or he thought that might have been mineral crystals. So I guess I gave too much of the minerals onto the food, so not into the food. So somehow the frogs had to get rid of it and make these through the skin. A very nice food for the frogs are the springtails, especially when you have small froglets. You saw the pictures in the children's tale. So you really have small froglets. They just can eat springtails. And what for me very interesting was I really had problems with spiders in my frog room. So I had those, we call them Kugelspinnen. I had a big amount of it. And I fed them to especially my Mantella aurantiaca. And it was very interesting. The Mantella aurantiaca usually just sit around and wait for food coming around. So if you feed them with crickets, they might come to the place where the crickets are. But if you put a spider into the terrarium, they really start to chase the spider like it's something very special for them. I don't know if they see the movement and are really getting a special hunger. But it was very interesting for me to see that this seems to be a prey they like very much. Suddenly you had 2 or 3 frogs chasing one spider, and if you had just one small cricket going around, even the frogs were hungry. Yeah. They didn't move at all. Yeah? I don't know, but this is to the thing with the leaf litter and the examination of Woodhead et al. And Vances at Keneal. So we have no idea what's living in the ground and what kind of prey they prefer. What I forgot to tell with the prey and the natural habitats, the Mantella aurantiaca is usually about 2.5 centimeters to 2.8 centimeters big. And the biggest thing they found in one of the stomachs was 1000-Füßler, so a small, not really warm, with a lot of
Centimeter.
yeah, with a length of 5 centimeters.
Woo!
So
Like spaghetti.
spaghetti, yeah, carbonara. Okay. The next point are problems and diseases. We already talked about the temperature and how to cool down a Mantella terrarium. One of the biggest problem used to be the heat-related muscle stress syndrome. So if you read old books about Mantellas, it's very often written that Mantellas are stressed very easily and sometimes just make 2 or 3 hops and start to cramp and die. It was said, okay, this must be because they are sometimes living in the highlands, so it must be cool there, so the terrarium was too hot, and that was the explanation. I think the problem was really more that the Mantellas weren't fed good. So, like I said, we have wonderful food in form of Drosophila. So if you just feed the Mantellas not in a good range of praise, you really can have these problems. Usually the Mantellas are not really easy to stress or easy to be killed by being stressed. If you have a good terrarium setup, if you have a good food for the animals, it's usually no problem. Problems I had with my Mantellas were the intestinal incidents. When I gave too many Drosophila, especially the big form. The picture I had before from the Drosophila, it's a so-called Drosophila ant, so we called it Ameise. It's a special form which was bred without any flies, or wings, sorry. I love to give this Drosophila, but I don't find it anymore. When I gave away all my frogs, I stopped breeding it myself, and since then I don't have it anymore, and nobody can, give it to me anymore. So with the intestinal incidences, I have it very often when I fed the big form of Drosophila with the big wings. I guess that they really get the problems because the food might be too hard. I told you my father was a pediatrician. It's always good to have a pediatrician in the house, especially when you keep frogs, because we tried to find methods to help the frogs with the intestinal incidences. And my father said we should try to put some calcium. So it's, I think, just 2% of calcium in the liquid, and we just put it on the intestinal, which was coming out of the frog, and very often after a day it went back again. And if you feed the frog with more soft food, then it didn't get the problem anymore. Very often it's talked about parasites as problems with Mantellas. I must tell you that I never cared about it. A lot of people told me, if you get Mantellas or if you get new frogs, just make a warm cure and just, 25% of the frogs might die, but then you can be sure that. And I said, this is no solution for me. If I'm able to give the frog a good setting and good food, a good temperature and a good climate to live in, in the nature they might have the parasites too. So I never had problems with frogs being killed by worms or whatever. So I think just frogs which are kept in not good conditions get the problems. Then the other thing, vitamin and mineral deficiency. I try to feed the food before I feed it to my frogs, and I think you really can do a good thing to your frogs. The temperature causes problems. We already talked about it. Most problems are the small settings, small terrariums, or some parts from a refrigerator which is connected to the terrarium, which doesn't belong there, I think. But usually you don't have problems with temperatures with the frogs. This frog you see on the picture doesn't have any problems. It is eating its skin. So I saw this very often in the terrarium, and I thought, wow, the poor frog. But if you really have a look at the frog, it starts to wipe with its leg the skin on the back and eating it somehow. So I think it's good when a frog does something like that. The skin lesions appear especially when I get frogs. Here we have a Mantella madagascariensis. I have no idea what happened to this frog. It might be that there have been parasites. It was a frog which was living in my terrarium for a longer time. It has an open fracture on the leg. I separated this frog, and with this problem, you don't have any chance to cure it. I don't know what there was. The problem which caused it. If it's just hang somewhere with a leg, or if there was like a bacterial thing, no idea. And this frog is a Mantella nigricans. When I got it, it got an open snout. So it was packed in a cricket box, and the holes were from the outside to the inside, and it must have been scratched on the box. I always try to take these frogs out of the terrarium and put it in a small one, which is easy for me to oversee. And every second day I took the frog out of the terrarium and put some antibiotics for the eyes on the lesions, and usually the frogs recover and don't have any problems. So I took the antibiotics for the eyes because they are just in a very small or low doses, which might cause no problems for the frogs. That again was the idea of our pediatrician in the house. The other problems I had a lot were with my tadpoles. We already talked about it today at lunch. So what can be the course for the reason why froglets die or why tadpoles look like that? My idea always was that I had a bad water quality when I raised the tadpoles. These are tadpoles from, I think, Mantella pulchra and Mantella aurantiaca, and I got deformations of the limbs or of the legs when I had too many tadpoles in small bowls or small aquariums, or when I didn't change the water properly, or when I took the wrong water. Yeah? I told you I went to a spring to get the water to spray the terrarium. Yeah? I tried to raise the tadpoles with this water, and very, very often I had deformation of the legs and of the limbs. Since I took the water out of the pond, which was much easier, it was much better. Before I took the water out of the pond, I took water from a friend who ran several aquariums. So she gave me the old water from their aquarium. That was a good idea too. So, and she used originally the water from the spring, so, but there already have been, I think, some microphobes or micro animals and algae, so it must be, I think, better for the frogs. I don't think that it's genetically with the frog itself. Two other interesting things. Once I had a tadpole without legs on the back. So this probably was genetically, I don't know. And what was very interesting, you see the tadpole on the right. I guess everybody knows what kind of species this was. It was Mantella aurantiaca. And I had two of these tadpoles which didn't go to the metamorphosis. So this tadpole was swimming about 8 months in my aquarium. If you looked from the bottom, you saw that there already were the front limbs, but they didn't break through the skin. I had two of these tadpoles, and they were from one clutch, and they both died because I accidentally, injured them on the belly, and they died because all the intestines came out. So they had a very, very thin skin, and yeah, I don't know what was wrong with these frogs, but yeah, it was very interesting for me to see an orange tadpole having for months. Yeah. Yeah. What I sometimes had when the water was the water quality for the tadpoles wasn't good was stiff legs, and this is a Mantella pulchran. You see, usually the Mantella pulchran have flesh marks in the area of the knees. At the side where the leg was stiff, it didn't have it. I don't know why, but yeah. The frog lived about 5 years, so it didn't have any problems with his stiff leg. No, but yeah, one day it disappeared from my terrarium. I didn't see it anymore, so I don't know what happened. And at the end, once I had a frog with 6 legs. But it didn't survive. It had problems to move with all these legs, so but it was interesting. So, now we're talking about the threats of Mantellas. Very often, or several years ago, it was said that the biggest threat of the Mantellas are the bad terrarium keepers, because they import thousands of Mantellas and kill them in their terrariums. Somehow the people are right. For me, it's really interesting to see. You have the years, the different species, and the number of the individuals which were imported to Europe. And if you see these numbers, yeah, you wonder why in 2005 there were just, I don't know, 20 Mantella orangiaca left, yeah, where all the other 116,180 might disappear. Yeah. Miguel Vences and Frank Laaf made nice reports. They looked in the habitats of Mantella orangiaca. After 1 year, they were really collected almost all the individuals which were living there or found there. After 2 years, there were as much as individuals living there. I think it's good that they stopped the export or made it much more difficult, because if you see these numbers, it's really bad to see how many animals, you must say, are killed in terrariums. But I think you also have to see that the threats are not just like collecting animals and killing them somewhere, but most threats are really like destroying the natural habitats. Madagascar is one of the poorest countries in the world, and people earned money by collecting animals. Those people who were collecting the animals looked that there were always animals in the habitats they could collect in the years after. This is a picture of the Terrarium swamps. It's a huge area, swamp area, where you used to have several habitats of Mantella orangiaca. Mantella orangiaca is living just in small pandanus trees forests. So these forests are located on spots where the water is going out of the swamp. going into a small creek or a small river. Mantella aurantiaca is just able to live in those pandanus tree forests because the leaves of the pandanus trees are orange-yellow when they fall to the ground. And just there, the animals can hide. Just in this forest, so the pandanus tree has like roots which go much over the ground because these forests are flooded regularly when Mantella aurantiaca is producing the clutches.
Mm.
So they need this. Yeah. We have problems in the Terrarium swarms that there are a lot of farmers like cutting everything down, making drainages for the water, lowering the water level so they can farm their rice in that area. Yeah. So the pandanus tree forests are not flooded anymore in that way they used to be. So the Mantella aurantiaca can reproduce. Another problem is there used to be 12 of these forests where Mantella aurantiaca was located around the swamp. A North American company built the biggest nickel mine worldwide in that area. So they took away 8 from these 12 spots. Nobody cares about it because we need nickel. We want our electric cars and we need a lot of nickel. So nobody cares. Another problem is that the gold rush, which used to be in North America, is now in Madagascar. So people are really digging for small pieces of gold, taking a lot of natural ground. Madagascar needs food, so traditionally they slash and burn the country, and yeah, that's why a lot of forests got lost. And this is a picture. The nickel pipeline needed to be built. So in a length of 250 kilometers, they built a pipeline from Andesibe to the east coast of Madagascar. And they just went through the forests. You see how much soil they moved. So, yeah. But there are people like my friend Rainer Dolch. This is in the territory Futsi swarms too. We went there for research just to look at the habitats of Mantella aurantiaca. The white t-shirt is Rainer Dolch, a German biologist who is running the Mitsinsu project under Sibé. And the guy next to him is Devin Edmonds. He is an American biologist. He used to breed a lot of Mantellas too, and he made a farming program for Rainer where they not really tried, they bred Mantella aurantiaca. They got this job from the Malagasy government because the nickel company needed to make things to protect the frogs, so they decided to give them some dollars to make a breeding station for Mantella aurantiaca. That's it. And they really bred thousands of Mantella aurantiaca, which they had to kill because they didn't know what to do. with the frogs. They weren't allowed to bring them back to other habitats because they might spread some diseases. They weren't allowed to export them to get some money or to breed them somewhere else in the world. So they bred the frogs and killed them.
Okay.
One reason I wrote the book for my daughter was not just to make her happy, but my idea was to find one day somebody who has a little bit money to translate the book into the Malgache. And my dream is just to give these books to schools in Madagascar, that the children learn what it means that a little white egg becomes a tadpole and later becomes a Mantella or a Jaca. That is one of the, I think, biggest wonder in the world. I mean, everybody who is sitting here is somehow fascinated and interested in the metamorphosis of an egg to a tadpole and from a tadpole to a frog. So I think if one day we can make the children in Madagascar being interested in those animals, we don't need any protection because they will do it automatically. But no political guy will come on that idea. So, then we come to the sexual stimulation. We have different possibilities to bring our frogs to sexual or to stimulate the frogs sexually. I think interesting is the light. I already told you I had a slight change of the light during the seasons of the year. So in winter I have like 2 hours less light range during the day where I have the light being on compared to the summer. Once a year in the spring I really take radically all the plants or almost all plants out of the terrarium, which will like growing everywhere. So I take a lot of biomass out of the terrarium, but I also give the frogs more light. And I clean the upper glass of my terrariums, so that makes some more light come through too. With the temperatures, they raise automatically, I think. If it's spring, if the outside temperatures are higher, you have higher temperatures in the terrariums too. I don't have any installation in the terrariums, like heaters or whatever, and no coolers. With the humidity, I keep my Mantellas pretty dry in winter. The lecture of Peter was interesting, that in one season there were no frogs found. Usually in winter I sprinkle once or twice a week my terrariums, and when I really want them to breed, I do it up to 3 times a day. So the terrarium is pretty humid. Most of the humidity takes part when the plants are like being sprinkled very often and give back the humidity. They soak up through their roots. With the food, it's interesting that a lot of Mantellas start calling when they are fat. So you put some Drosophila, some crickets into the terrarium, and suddenly the males start to call. I feed my Mantellas usually twice a week when it's winter, and in summer when the temperatures are higher, they get 3-4 times a week some food. The terrarium setting, I told you that I take off some plants. With the high rate of sprinkling the terrarium, you have a higher level of the water, which is, for example, with the Mantella orangiaca, like I told you, very interesting and very necessary, because in the rain season, when the swamp is like being overflooded, they start to lay their eggs. And what is stimulating the animals too is if you hire the number of the individuals. I think most of you guys are keeping dendrobates. Usually, my idea, I have no idea of, or not a lot of knowledge of dendrobates. My idea is that very often you have small groups of, I don't know, 2 or 3 animals in a terrarium. I keep my Mantellas in big groups. That's why I have big terrariums. And minimum, I think you should have 8 individuals. So you can be sure you have males and females. And if the terrarium is big enough, like the one in my practice, I have up to 20 individuals of one species in the terrarium. So this gives you a good opportunity to breed, even if it's hard to find the clutches. The sex determination of Mantella orangiaca is pretty easy. The males have this femoral glands, and you can see very well on this picture the Wolfarian ducts. And the female, if they have already some eggs, you see the eggs through the belly. With Mantella madagascariensis, it's easy too. Usually the males have a white throat, while the females just don't have a white throat. It's interesting, Mantella pulchra and Mantella viridis, they have this tube with a throat, and when they call, you really see like a white signal coming. Yeah. I don't know if it's for the females to be attracted to, but it's interesting that those 3 Mantellas really have this very regularly. And then you see the femoral glands of the males, where you don't see anything at the females, but you don't see the clutches too. So, the clutches of Mantella orangiaca, most of the Mantellas produce clutches with a number of minimum 40 eggs, up to 120, 130 at Mantella orangiaca. Very often the clutches are very well hidden somewhere in the terrarium. So you see there are some eggs, but there are some tadpoles. Very often people thought that clutches of Mantellas are very sensible to light. So once some light is going onto the clutches, they die. That was probably because we choose the wrong ground. I told you that in the 90s I took not peat as a ground, but other soil, and all the clutches died. I figured out that especially Mantella orangiaca, for example, they prefer laying the clutches on mangrove wood, or on peat, and then the clutches are developing in a higher rate than when they put it somewhere else. So this might be very important for the clutches. There you see a clutch of Mantella or Untitled. This is already 2 days old, and a clutch of Mantella viridis, which is just a few hours old. But you see that the clutches of Mantella or Untitled has a much higher number of eggs. It can be up to 130, while viridis is usually just producing 40 to maximum 50 eggs per clutch.
Do you use a teaspoon, or how do you? I see you have a fork there, but
Yeah,
how do you do like that?
I love it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's my my clutch fork.
Okay.
It's a plastic fork, and it really worked out fine. I went to have some how do you say, professional. I'm a physical therapist. Professional courses in Switzerland, and I very often bought small salads in the supermarket to eat them at night for dinner, and they had like those forks, which one side is a spoon and the other side is a fork. And these were excellent to take the clutches out of the terrarium, because you can take the clutch like that with a fork, or you take the spoon and just take it out. So,
Good.
my girlfriend saw this picture 2 days ago, and she asked, "But it's not one of our forks, isn't it?" And I said, "No, it's a special clutch fork." So she was afraid. I just put it back like that. Yeah. Yeah. You remember the book I read in the beginning? I had the picture of the clutch with the tadpoles and the 1 cent coin next to it. This is the time when I usually take out the clutches out of the terrarium. Then I put them in small bowls, like that. It's about that size, just filled with some water. You really have to watch out. Most of, or all Mantellas, putting the clutches on land. Tadpoles can drown. I never thought that, but if you put the clutches too early into water, the tadpoles die. Somehow they need to be in the air. I have no idea, but you really have to watch out not to take the clutches too early out of the terrarium, or not to put them too early on the water, because then the eggs really will die. Yeah. At that stadium, I take the clutches out of the terrarium and put them in small bowls where the tadpoles really can just stay the first days very quiet. They don't eat anything, they just rest, and after a while, about 2 or 3 days, they start to move a little bit more. They are in the beginning very whitish, very white, and when they change the colors and become dark, like here, you can start to feed them. Sometimes I left the clutches in the terrarium, or I didn't find them, and one day you find some small tadpoles in the water part, or you find small frogs. These are all froglets from Mantella viridis. The small ones are frogs I left in the terrarium as tadpoles, and the big one is a frog I raised separately in a small aquarium. It's easier to feed the bigger one, to get enough springtails, small springtails for the small ones is very, very hard, and that's the reason a lot of froglets die. We talked at lunch about the expectata. That might be interesting just to have maybe the size. If they are very, very tiny when they come to land, I had the problems with some Mantella bernhardi I got. They were very small when I got them. I really had problems to feed them and raise them. So I have an old friend. He used to breed a lot of Mantellas. His name is Helmut Kuron. He lives near Hamburg. He's now 70 years old, and he said he was one of the guys who was breeding the Mantellas in the 70s and 80s, and they had no idea that there's something like a frog day where you can buy springtails and food, or they had no idea how to raise their own food. So they really had different terrariums. They put a lot of springtails in the terrariums and had about 10 frogs. They decided we're going to try to raise them. So they had 4 or 5 different terrariums with springtails and caught the frogs and put them in the next terrarium when all the springtails, or almost all springtails, were eaten, and gave the terrariums time to recover, that the springtails can become more, and that's how they raised their Mantellas in the 70s and 80s. It's interesting how we do it today. So we have the food. Yeah. I have my guy in Germany. Every second week I get my micro crickets and my Drosophila and whatever I need. So DHL is delivering and no problem at all. But the guys used to have a lot of problems. So they almost couldn't raise any Mantellas.
What did you say? Micro crickets and
Micro crickets, Drosophila, so fruit flies. Yeah. This was an experiment I made. Very often you find clutches of Mantella of Mantellas in general, which are much older and laid somewhere in the terrarium you didn't find. I told you I have a lot of Mantella viridis, and one year I decided not to raise the clutches anymore, but to do something important for science with it. So I made some experiences, and I tried to find out how long the clutches or the tadpoles can exist within the clutch before they need to be spilled somewhere in the water or come into the water. And I found out that they make it up to 56 days just being in not a very humid, but in kind of humid area without water. They just live in the, let's say, transparent, protecting sticky mess. Very often you find clutches where you see that there are older tadpoles, but not as many. Yeah? So I guess that they feed on other tadpoles or unfertile eggs. Yeah? I had the problem that everything died after maximum 56 days, just within 1 day. You know, all tadpoles died. I guess that too many were killed, and then whatever, they poisoned the other tadpoles. So yeah, it was interesting for me to listen to the lecture before, because hearing that there are frogs that mature the eggs until they are froglets, I don't know, maybe it can happen individually at Mantellas too, if the conditions are right, if the killed tadpoles in one clutch are not poisoning the others. I don't know. Probably not. No. Okay. If you want, I give a more detailed explanation to Mantella aurantiaca.